never knew I loved you so. Please say you love me too.
Calling the April 17th Harbor Commission meeting to order. Would you call Ms. Brzezinski, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Betsy Kramer.
Present.
Bill Spicer.
Here.
Corey Bantolin. Here. Frank Kelly. Here. Dennis Power. Jim Sloan. Here. Helene Webb.
Mr. Riedman, any changes to the agenda?
No changes this evening.
Okay, this would be the point of public comment. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Approval of the minutes, please.
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Thank you. Department update, Mr. Riedman, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. In terms of council action, since we last met, the council authorized the General Services Manager to increase the purchase order for Work Incorporated for janitorial services in the harbor for fiscal year 2015 in an amount not to exceed $31,590. So the amount of that contract went from about $229,000 to about $250,000, and that's for all the janitorial around the marinas and the harbor commercial area. Additionally, the council adopted an ordinance amending the municipal code, Title 17, pertaining to parking in waterfront parking lots, which we've had quite a bit of discussion about. And in terms of tentative agenda items for the May meeting, we'll be looking at kicking off the local coastal program update. So we'll bring that to you starting next month. And that's all I have for the director.
Thank you very much. Short and sweet. And Business Services Report. Mr. Bossy, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Frequently, staff gets requests or questions from the public regarding how many people visit Stearns Wharf on an annual basis. We get it from the general public. We've also received questions from the Chamber of Commerce for their facts and figures. And so in response to those constant questions, back in the fall of 2011, staff put in what is known as a TRAFSIS people counting system. And now this particular people counting system is located towards the base of the wharf, so it's enough, and it only counts pedestrians. And so it's far enough onto the actual wharf where the people are, we hope, are actually continuing to go out to the end of the wharf and visit the shops and restaurants. It only measures, I shouldn't say measures, but counts people going out on the wharf. It does not do the reverse and count them going up. So it's a one-way counter. And what this system does is it uses thermal imaging to count people. So even if you're arm in arm or you have a baby in your arm or on your back or on your stomach, whatever, in a pack, what it'll do is it takes each individual's unique heat, body temperature, and then calculates that as a person and tabulates it. And we can break it down by the hour, the month, the day, and everything in between. Now, that's only half of the amount of people who get out on the wharf. The other half of that is through the automobile. And so our staff, our parking staff, is able to tabulate how many autos go out onto Stearns Wharf. And they do this partially by the tickets that are issued. We don't issue tickets to delivery trucks and things of that nature, or city staff who are going out for business. So it's about as close as we can get to actual counts on vehicles. And I have a couple slides here. The top row of this slide shows is the pedestrian information. And on the bottom row, you will see vehicles and their information. So on the left, in both columns, it's tabulated on a month-by-month basis, so January through December. And for the calendar year 2013, the wharf had 1,089,516 pedestrian visitors going through our TRAFSIS thermal imaging people counter system. And with the highest month on the right, we rank them. The highest was July of 2013 with a total of 146,294 people visiting the wharf as pedestrians. Now on the bottom row, you'll see our vehicles. And that total was 249,718 vehicles going out onto Stearns Wharf in calendar year 13. Similar to the pedestrian ranking, the highest month for vehicles was July with 25,378, and the lowest was January with 18,093. Now, it's interesting to note that as far as pedestrian visitors, well, as far as both, we had 6,000 more pedestrian visitors in calendar year 13 than we did calendar year 12, which was the first year we could actually tabulate this. So we had 6,000 more pedestrians, yet we had about 1,500 fewer cars out on the wharf. So it's an interesting piece of data. I would hope that it's more people taking public transportation. But I found that kind of interesting as to how that works. And as we move forward with our ski data, parking control equipment, we'll be able to tabulate the vehicles out on there even with more detail. And that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. There is one more slide. It's just a graphic representation with the green being the pedestrians and the blue being vehicles. And again, they kind of follow the same trend, although the vehicles stay relatively constant between 18 and 25,000. However, you can see that big spike in July, which was similar to 2012. Again, biggest spike in July. I think the lower months for 2012 was February as opposed to January. So it varies a little, but not too much. No, that really concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any
Thank you very
questions.
much. Very interesting. Other
Question?
Commissioner Power.
Any thought on whether the relative increase of pedestrians over vehicles is due to the cruise ships?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Power, that's a great question. We do see a significant amount of people from the cruise ships going out on the wharf. Obviously, our wharf merchants always want to see more of those cruise ship people out on the wharf. But unfortunately, it doesn't tabulate, cruise ship visitor versus tourist versus local. But one thing we can do is monitor. Obviously, we know the days the cruise ships are coming, and so we can kind of monitor that data as to see what that midweek spike is, or whenever they do come, see how the cruise ships do impact the wharf. That's a great idea.
Well, I realize you can't tag the cruise ship people that come through, with GPS or paint stripes or something. But yeah, it was just a thought, and it might be one more benefit of the cruise ships.
Ms. Sloan.
So, Brian, I have to ask about March and the cars being so much higher than. If you go back to the previous two graphs. So in pedestrian visitors, it was ranked 8th with 80,000. And then in vehicles, it's ranked 4th, right up there with June, who had 111,000 pedestrians. So any thoughts on that? Any guesses?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, I can guess a lot. The troubling thing, or I guess something that we can never really get a whole lot of real accuracy on, is the vehicles and how many people they're carrying out onto the wharf. When in talking with our traffic folks over in Public Works, there are figures for carpool and people who are on the freeways. You can assign a number, whether I think it's around 2.25 is the average capacity of a vehicle. When asked, and I talked with them at length about this, is there any similar thing that can be done for wharfs or tourist attractions or things like that? There are no figures out there, but I would like to think that as far as cars go, and talking with them, they thought a figure between 2 and 3 would be likely on a per vehicle basis, which...
There's 4, aside from just pedestrians.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a figure in there. There's just been real hard science behind.
We don't know why March. Did we have rain in March of 13? It's been so long, I can't remember.
Based on our I don't think we had... we didn't have a lot of rain in 2013. I noticed, though, that going back to 2012, the actual lowest number for vehicles and pedestrians was December. And so I was trying to think back into 12. Was that a cold December? Was it not? I know we had a spat of it this year in 13, but it...
Who knows?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Bantam?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you sort of covered it there at the end, but not to get you into too much work, but maybe next time just like an average temperature for the month, which isn't too tough to get, and see if it correlates. Not too much work, but that's my only suggestion.
Slight curiosity, do bicycles rank in there? Are they pedestrians or are they vehicles? I see a fair number of bicycles going out to the pier.
Madam Chair, I would hope they would be walking their bicycles. So if they were walking, then they would be picked up by the TRAFSIS system. If they went out on through the car lane, then it wouldn't pick them up. It's very defined on that pedestrian alley that people walk through.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Excuse me.
Now I'm curious. So, as a cyclist, I ride out on the wharf through the car lane. Are we supposed to walk our bikes, or are there rules for that? I know on the breakwater you're not allowed to ride your bike, but as far as the wharf, just to clarify for folks.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bantalan, if you're riding the bike, you're supposed to be in the roadway. That's the way it's supposed to be done. If you want to walk your bike, you're welcome to do it in the walkway.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Harbor Operations Report, Mr. Kronman.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Well, my report tonight's about our signature springtime events in the harbor. Starting with May 3rd, we have our 8th annual Operation Clean Sweep, and as most of you are familiar, this started in Marina 4 8 years ago, where we began a litter removal program, a seafloor litter removal program we call Operation Clean Sweep. And to date, we've removed over 14 tons of junk, and it ranges from barbecues and bow pulpits to crab traps and boat liners and you name it, it's on the bottom. And we've been very, very successful with a core of volunteers, usually about 50 dock volunteers and divers. This year we're focusing on fingers M through P in Marina 1. It's the next to last year of a full circumnavigation of the harbor. And we're hoping to begin again in 2 years back in Marina 4 so we can begin to look at how the trend is looking. Have we been successful in removing a significant amount of junk off the seafloor? So I've had a great response to initial queries for help divers and volunteer dock workers. I know some commissioners who got press ganged into this by my email have volunteered to participate on the 3rd, and I sure appreciate that. And if folks want to volunteer, we still have plenty of opportunity. They can call me directly at 897-2587, or certainly find me on the city's website and email me. But we're getting a lot of the dive businesses in the harbor have volunteered to participate again, so we're looking forward to another successful event. That's on Saturday, May 3rd. And then on the following Saturday, we have our annual nautical swap meet, which you may have. We issued a press release earlier this week, and we're getting sign-ups for that already. And that's our 8th annual nautical swap meet. And that's really a lot of fun. That's free donuts and coffee and fruit for all the folks who come down to peruse or buy or sell. And vendor spaces are only $10 a piece. A vendor space is equal to the size of a parking stall. It all takes place in the Marina 3 parking lot. And it's a benefit for the Harbor Merchants Association. So the dual sponsors are the Waterfront Department and the Harbor Merchants Association. They provide all the food and what have you, and free coffee for the public. So it's a really neat and unique event. It's kind of a local event for people who are buying, but from vendors, we find them come all the way up from San Diego, selling everything from fishing rods and kayaks to all kinds of boat gear and motors and pumps and on and on and on. So it's really kind of cool. In fact, it's interesting. Some vendors go away with as much stuff as they came with, but just different stuff. So it's a lot of fun, good time for boaters to get stuff out of their dock boxes before the full-on boating season hits and clear out their dock box and fill their boat with stuff that they need. And again, this year, as a companion to the nautical swap meet, we have a hazardous materials turn-in day. There will be a designated truck just east of the nautical swap meet area in the parking lot. And folks, slip permittees in the harbor will receive a ticket in their May billing, their May statement, which will entitle them to get rid of used oil and oil-containing paints and varnishes and household hazardous waste. And so another time to get rid of stuff that's been lingering in your dock box. The admission is free. It's supported by a grant from Cal Recycle, and so we encourage folks in the harbor. We don't encourage folks from outside of the harbor to bring whatever in their garage, but we do encourage folks in the harbor. This is for them, and it's all part of the kickoff for boating season, and so everybody can have the gear they want and get rid of the stuff they don't. So that concludes my report on our spring events, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the report. Are there any questions from the Commission? Commissioner Webb.
Thank you for your report, Mick. People, slip permittees who receive electronic bills, will they be getting that in their email as well? Certificate?
That's a great question, and I will make sure that happens. We'll send you a scanned version, or one way or the other, we'll make sure you get it. Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner.
Any other questions, comments? Guess not. Again, thanks for the report. East Harbor improvements, Mr. Triber? Excuse me?
The recommendation.
Recommendation, Ms. Brzezinski?
East Harbor improvements. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a report on East Harbor improvements.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. The East Harbor is pretty much defined as from the launch ramp out to the south end of the Rock Groin. Several years ago, one of the local tenants out there had taken a look around and noted that it was somewhat deteriorated and dubbed it the Forgotten Corner. So at that time, we got together and thought about what sort of improvements we could make. And since then, we've had 4 pretty much significant projects that are almost completed that I'll talk to you a little bit about tonight, and the potential future project. Those projects involved boating trails, launch ramp improvements, boat launching facility, sea landing, landscaping, and hardscaping, the Rock Groin handrail, and a future project may involve a new ADA gangway at the sea landing docking facility. The Department of Boating and Waterways, which was recently absorbed by the State Department of Parks and is now the Division of Boating and Waterways, administers 2 grants. One is the Public Assistance Grant Program, and that's for launch ramps, public boat launching facilities, for launching any sort of vessel, and the Boating Trails Grant Program, which is really caters towards haul-outs on rivers. And it's a very popular program. If anybody ever does any river rafting in California, you'll see a lot of their funded facilities. It just so happens that we had met with them and talked a little bit about the potential to take advantage of both of these grant programs. The first one was the Boating Trails Program, and this was a good location that we identified was on the easterly section of the launch ramp. It was quite deteriorated. It had not been used by the public for decades. It was just too beat up. And so the Boating and Waterways folks felt it was a good use, a potential use. So we received a grant of about $450,000 to go ahead and make some improvements. We replaced about 5,000 square feet of concrete and added this low freeboard dock made out of fiberglass. It was completed in May of 2012 and immediately got quite a bit of use. It's specifically designed for stand-up paddle boards, kayaks, small sailboats, and the like. And the best part of it is it really helps separate out or move these non-powered watercraft away from the other launching lanes. It's pretty common that you'll get a group like this where it'll take up a very large area, and we really don't want the intersection of these non-powered watercraft and large power boats coming in together because there's potential for problems. But it's been very well received and very well used over the last couple of years. The second project is referred to as our boat launching facility. It's from the Public Assistance Grant Program from the Department of Boating and Waterways. Similar area, about 5,000 square feet of concrete. And this was designed to create 2 new launching lanes and a washdown area. And something else I'd like to note is while they were doing the work, they were able to remove a lot of sediment in and around the Santa Barbara Sailing Center. So they can now dock much larger vessels. It was high and dry there before, so now you get a boat like this in here and around the other corner, and also help them load and offload some of their larger vessels from the charters that were running aground. So it was there were multiple benefits to that project. The little barriers you see in the background there, they look like they're high and dry, but at high tide, just the top sticks out, and it's a deep drop-off behind it. So we put that there so people don't attempt to launch their vessel and fall off into deeper water. But this project was done. The total cost was about, about $491,000, almost a little bit more than the grant amount. And it's been very well used and really kind of spreads out the use out there. So the use of the launch ramp is much less congested on busy days. This project also completed complete replacement of the launch ramp. There was a grant program that was taken advantage of in 2002 for the center lanes. There's 4 lanes that were funded at that time, the Boating Trails program, and then this one. So the entire launch ramp is done and should serve the boating public for many, many decades to come. The next project that we just completed was all along the sea landing area. The sea landing has become a very popular area. It was very popular before. It used to get about 35,000 people a year visiting to go and do whale watching, sport fishing, sport diving, and the like. And with the increase in cruise ship visits, it's probably close to about 100,000 visitors a year. We hired a landscape architect to come up with a variety of different improvements, mainly for landscaping and as well as for some hardscapes such as the sidewalk. So this is what it looked like before. These trees on the left-hand side were Myroporum trees, and they were diseased and kind of falling down one by one, falling on cars and just deteriorating slowly but surely. There was another area. This is at sort of the end of Bath Street. This is a very congested sort of an intersection, also where the cruise ship hospitality tent set up. So you see the before, and here's the after. 14 palm trees were planted along there with some other landscaping, suited for a coastal environment, also drought tolerant. This little corner we also spruced up as part of the project, and the area in general just looks much, much better. It's been very well received by the public. We also received a $6,000 grant from Santa Barbara Beautiful for the landscaping, and the total cost of all the landscaping was on the order of about $100,000. The sidewalk is about 250 feet long through there, and it was all cracked and beat up and not looking very good as well. So that was part of the project, but constructed separately. We did the landscaping in the summer and went forward with this improvement just recently in the end of the winter. It looks very, very nice. It's a great improvement, and one of the main features is this tile mosaic of the city seal that we had installed there. Betsy Gallery is a local artist, does tile mosaics all around. She's doing a couple out at UCSB right now. And Alf Ramirez specializes in installation of these type of tile mosaics. And just to set the record straight, there's been a lot of questions about the orientation of the tile mosaic. And we oriented it kind of sideways so it wouldn't be upside down for anybody walking to or from the sea landing. And it really faces towards Stearns Wharf and the Riviera. So that was the logic behind it. We've had a lot of people ask, and we presented it that way. It was reviewed and approved by the Architectural Board of Review. The final component of the project was a handrail along the sea landing on either side of the building, the north and south side, where there was none. With so many visitors and a lot of people sometimes queuing up in lines to get back on the cruise ships, we felt it was somewhat vulnerable to not have some sort of a handrail. Now, this handrail, it almost appears as though it's clear, but in reality it's a cable rail. And the concept behind the design was that it be somewhat clear and see-through. So it really turned out nice, and we just finished it up just last week, as a matter of fact. The final project that's out to bid right now is the rock groin handrail. This is a wooden handrail that was installed in 1987. It's a little over 300 feet long, and it's really, really falling apart. You know, there's some parts where you could just grab the wood and it just falls apart in your hand. It's also not code compliant. So our staff, Teresa Lawler, our engineering technician, actually designed a code compliant rail. It's going to be made out of a cementatious material that's kind of like a siding, and it's out to bid as we speak. And we'll do the entire rail all the way out to the tip of the rock groin for about $40,000. And there is lighting in it. There's lighting in it existing, and we'll just replace that lighting so people can go out there at night and kind of see their way around. The total cost of these projects, as you can see, if we break them down one by one, the Boating Trails project, we received $350,000 in grants, spent about $31,000 out of our own money. The boat launching facility, where the washdown area is, $450,000 in grants, $43,000 of waterfront funds. The sea landing, we received $6,000 in grants for the landscaping, spent another $94,000 on that, and $220,000 for the hardscape. And the rock groin handrail will spend, our estimate's about $40,000. So we received $806,000 in grants, $428,000 in our capital funds from our Harbor Preservation Fund. So we've invested a little over $1.2 million in this area since 2012. And it's really turned out nicely. We've received a lot of compliments on the area. We have one more project that we're contemplating. All the improvements to date have taken place on sidewalks and areas, launch ramp. It's the responsibility of the waterfront. The sea landing itself, the building and the docks, are the responsibility of the tenant. We have worked with them in the past. Several years ago, about 2008, we actually helped remodel the restrooms in that building. And we're working with them on possibly coming up with a design to add another gangway that you see in blue there. Here's a little blow-up of it. And the idea is that there'd be two gangways servicing their docks. We could separate the public from the cruise ships and also make it ADA compliant, because the existing dock is not ADA compliant. And there are so many people moving through there now, there'd certainly be some benefit in doing so. This looks like a simple project, but in reality would be somewhat complicated. There's a fair amount of engineering design to do to land a gangway up on a bulkhead and the rock groin there. It would require quite a few permits, most importantly through the California Coastal Commission. It's in the original permit jurisdiction, Army Corps of Engineers, Regional Water Quality Control Board, and Department of Fish and Game. This can be a very time-consuming process on the order of about a year. We expect the cost could be on the order of about $100,000. So we're going to look at a few different options to advance. Mick and I are actually going to meet in a couple of weeks and talk about pursuing some grant opportunities through Homeland Security for this. And we'll also meet with the tenant and see what we can do as a partnership. Other than that, that's all we can think of to improve what was once the forgotten corner. And we think we've made some significant improvements. It's been really well received by visitors and the tenants alike. And I hope you get a chance to get out there and visit it. That concludes my presentation this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl, for the report. Are there any questions from the Commission? Commissioner Webb.
Thank you for the report, Carl. Good work. What boats would be serviced by the proposed gangway?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Webb, it would serve the cruise ship tenders that come in. So they would separate them off to that section, and all the people that would come on and off would go off that south side of the sea landing. So the public that still goes whale watching and sport diving and sport fishing would be able to access from a separate gangway. There is a requirement already to separate the public from the cruise ship passengers, but it's just a little bit awkward with a single gangway and letting one group pass while the other waits. So that would be the intent.
And how would it be used when there was no cruise ship activity?
It would just be additional gangway. All marinas are supposed to have ADA compliant gangways, so there's a benefit just in that in and of itself.
Questions, comments? Commissioner Sloan.
So in the design, just to follow up on Helene, and again, thank you for the report. That was really good. And it does look nice down there. I go by there every day. So the gangway that comes down could be used by the whale watching and fishing, sport fishing boats when there weren't cruise ships in town. Are they connected to the current sea landing?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, that's correct. So when there are no cruise ships, anybody can use it to get down there.
I have an unrelated question. I've been going by the wharf early in the morning, and I notice it's closed and there's a sign out there. Is it always closed at that hour, or are we doing more work at night and opening it later?
Commissioner Sloan, we've been doing work at night. We've been doing pile driving at night, so that's why it's been closed at night. It is open to foot traffic at night. It's closed to vehicles at night, in general.
Thank you.
Okay, on to agenda item number 6. Jeanette, would you read the staff recommendation, please?
Berthing policy, designated commercial fishing slips, recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a report on the berthing policy for designated commercial fishing slips in Santa Barbara Harbor, and recommend to City Council amendments to that policy regarding method and timing for proof of earnings.
Mr. Conman.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, In 2001, the Harbor Commission recommended that City Council approve policy guidelines governing specially designated commercial fishing berths, 42 of which are seen in this diagram that's on the screen now. And there were 3 others also that were included as part of the 1999 expansion of Marinas 1 and 4 for a total of 45. The Commission's recommendations were approved in resolution form by the Council, and with various amendments over the years, including 2-year period to a 3-year period to a 2-year period, requirement of fish and game tickets, added requirement of showing documentation from the California Department of Fish and Game's licensing folks up in Sacramento. This policy has remained essentially the same since 2001. This year, we have just a couple of amendments, neither of them which deal with the $15,000 earnings requirement for people who are in this group. 31 of the 45 who are in this group who are required to make that $15,000 of earnings, which, by the way, also come with a slip fee break of about half compared to a 35-foot slip in the harbor. It's about $471 a foot right now for the folks who are in the earnings part of the program. Some boats were grandfathered in. Some folks on 1A finger had the opportunity to elect to participate in the program for the slip rollback, or they were allowed the opportunity to not participate and pay full slip fees with no earnings requirement. The first thing I'd like to report out to you in terms of where we're at right now is the fact that we are up to date and up to speed. All fishermen to whom this policy, the earnings portion of this policy applies, are up to date on their earnings, and Jeanette and I worked pretty hard for the last several months to make sure that everybody was up to date. It wasn't a matter of people not fishing. It was a matter of making sure all the paperwork got to us and was corroborated by what the state was reporting. And we're happy to say tonight that we are there. So everybody who has earnings due as of April 17, 2014, has done so and proved it to the department. So tonight we're recommending only a couple of very small, we believe, minor amendments to this policy, both of which liberalize it both for the fishermen and for the workload aspect for administrative staff at the waterfront. Both of them you'll find in Section 4 of the attached resolution that has these amendments in it as either strike-throughs or underlines. The first that we'd like to do is we'd like to eliminate the requirement that fishermen produce and bring to us their actual fish landing receipts that they get every single time they go fishing or every time they make a sale at a Saturday morning market and what have you. Now that we have found out that the method of having fishermen sign one sheet of paper and designate which months or years they would like the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to verify, now that we found out that that system works very well and we've got a great relationship with the folks up at the Custodian of Records office in Sacramento, there's no need for the fishermen to dig through their paperwork and find those fish receipts and bring them to us. And they're very proprietary about that too, and we're very sensitive to the fact that fishermen don't want us looking at their fish tickets, even though we just look at them, see that it's 15 grand. We always give this stuff back to them. We never ever keep or make copies of that. Doing away with that will be make it easier for the fishermen and for us, quite frankly. And the second one also is in the same vein. It'll benefit. It'll be a win-win, if you will. Fishermen have started earnings at different times of the year. They transfer into a slip, or they get assigned a slip, or they come into the designated commercial fishing slip through one means or another at different times of the year. Now, this won't solve all our quote-unquote headache, if you will, of, every month we got to check, which fishermen are due that month. We have a marvelous spreadsheet showing us. But what we'd like to do with your support and with council's support is to make all of the landings receipts due on April 15th of the year. Now, we assume that's a time of year when people are pulling out a lot of that information for tax purposes anyway. And so we figured if we're going to pick a date, we could have picked a random date. We tried to pick one that made some sense to us anyway. And as part of this amendment, you can see in the resolution that the first April 15th, where this would be actuated, if you will, would be the April 15th following the term of the earnings cycle that a fisherman is in. For example, if I'm a fisherman whose earnings cycle is up in October of 2015, they would be allowed to go to April of 2016 to prove their $15,000 of earnings. We figured prorating it and doing all of that and trying to get that wording into amendment would be more hassle and more an imposition on the fishermen and our administrative staff than it was worth. Now, is that going to be equitable across the board? No. The bottom line is it's a benefit to anybody. Everybody's going to get an extension unless their earnings were due on April 15th. If they were due on April 14th, they're only going to get a one-day, bit of grace, extra grace out of this. If they were due April 16th, they're going to get, almost an entire year. So it just depends randomly where they fall on the curve to how much extra time they'll get to make these earnings. But after this earnings period we're currently in, we expect to be caught up relative to everybody demonstrating their proof of earnings on April 15th. And or they can do it before April 15th. If they made the earnings and they want to just come in and get it done with and get it out of their hair, that's fine. We'll certainly accept that. But April 15th would be the deadline for them to prove that to us. So in conclusion, we believe that the berthing policy is still working. Everybody's meeting their earnings. It's a modest earnings at $15,000 for a 2-year cycle. But I can tell you that the range of individuals involved make everything from $16,000 in that period to 7 figures. So it's quite a range across the board. The only complaints I've heard are from the really productive, really productive fishermen who say, why do I have to bother with this petty bureaucratic stuff? And we try to explain to them that, this is a one-size-fits-all policy, but we are, as I mentioned in the First Amendment, trying to make it easier for them as well. So we believe it's working. We believe these proposed amendments will make it work even more smoothly. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And of course, with your approval, we would move on to council for adoption of the resolution.
Great, thank you for the report. The questions, comments from the commission? Commissioner Bantlin.
I'll make a motion to receive and file the report and make a recommendation to council on the 2 amendments.
Anyone second that? Second. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Unanimous. On to the communications, staff commission communications. Commissioner?
I have one question from the beginning of the meeting. The increase in the contract with Work Incorporated, so do we have more work done, or is this just a renewal of the contract? What was the $31,000? Maybe you could refresh our memory.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, that is due to the increase in the minimum wage that will go into effect, and then next year we'll see a similar increase because there's another increase coming in the minimum wage.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Spicer.
I have a question also regarding cruise ships, topic that's come up earlier. Recently, we saw a lot of attention to a visiting ship that had ill passengers, and I believe this wasn't the first one, and if tonight's not the night to answer my question, I'm okay if you want to come back, but I believe public health and safety is our first concern, but my question is, what is the process and how is the specific decision made for allowing cruise ship passengers to make landfall if the health is an issue?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Spicer, I'd be happy to answer that now. I think it's pretty straightforward. When we receive a report that there are ill passengers aboard a cruise ship, we engage in a protocol that was established a couple of years ago when this first happened. Recognizing the fact that we're harbor managers, not medical professionals, we contact the county's Department of Public Health, and in particular, Dr. Wada, who is director of the county's Department of Public Health. And both times this has happened, Dr. Wada himself has come down to the dock before any passengers have disembarked and traveled out to the cruise ship where he has met personally with the head of their medical staff and examined their protocols and procedures for diagnosing patients, quarantining patients, and screening patients who are designated for departure off of the ship. And both times, Dr. Wada has deemed it be safe for the public, for our community, for the passengers to disembark the cruise ship. And both times that's proved to be the case. There haven't been any outbreaks of any kind of illness on shore, certainly that I'm aware of, as a result of those visits. But that's basically the protocol, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact that public health is our number one priority. When there are ill passengers aboard the cruise ship, our interest is not in getting that cruise ship to unload all its passengers, come heck or high water. It's to make sure that it can be done in a healthy and safe manner, and that's why we have the protocols we have.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I know that decision, obviously has an economic impact, but I'm glad to hear that that's not the primary driver. Appreciate it.
No, it's not. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from Commissioner Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mick, I just had a question on the berthing policy. I went ahead and the recommendation as you presented it had nothing to do but with the question that I had when I read my notes. And if this is better answered someplace else, that's fine with me. I noticed that and I understand that the berthing policy is came in a long time ago when we had, and that we are concerned about keeping a commercial harbor. But I guess my question is, since the 2-year minimum appears to be relatively low, I mean, as far as the amount of fishing that we're actually asking an individual to do, is there any concern among the fishermen? As I live aboard down in the harbor, I see all the guys moving around all the time in the various slips. And if there is a big producer, is there any demand or request from other fishermen to have one of the close-up slips and receive the discounted slip fee? And if this is not an issue, then it's not an issue.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kelly, we haven't heard, the only time we've heard that kind of sentiment expressed is when people say, I see a boat right there in the front row that isn't fishing, and I'm fishing hard, what's up with that? And usually the explanation is they were grandfathered in back in 2001 and didn't have to make the earnings, or they may be a vessel that fishes infrequently and maybe targets one kind of fish like salmon, and they leave the harbor and nobody sees them for a couple months, or that they are just not, like I say, not fishing that often, but are making the grade. But also, I should add that several fishermen, even at this $15,000 requirement or limit, if you will, have washed out of the program, have been unable to make that $15,000. And so we're fairly, in keeping with the details of the resolution, we're fairly sensitive to bereavement issues of a passing spouse, a broken boat, a boat that was destroyed or lost, various issues that may generate or warrant, if you will, a time extension on the earnings. But if something becomes chronic, and appears to us to be chronic, we've usually been able to have a discussion with that fisherman about, look, this isn't working for you, and this isn't working for us, and they end up transferring their slip and getting out of fishing. And by attrition, that way, we've actually been getting more and more productive fishermen in the program.
Okay, thank you. And then the only other question is, the limit was set in 2001, if I remember correctly, and since then, there's been some inflation, the CPI has moved. Would it be untoward to ask the council to possibly consider moving that number just to keep up with where the dollar has moved and the value of fish?
It's not an unfair question or suggestion at all. But quite frankly, I was surprised that it went through so quickly here tonight without that or something else coming up. But that's certainly a fair question. I don't know what the process would be for undoing a vote, but if you wanted to put that, that's for the commission to recommend.
That wasn't the way the recommendation was written, so I just wanted to let the recommendation slide through because it was a language change, and that was simple. But maybe it's something that the commission, would like to take up at the next meeting or something like that to potentially recommend, well, can we move that, $1,000 or $2,000, or is it even necessary? If the city council doesn't think it's necessary, they can do it in a heartbeat.
We didn't recommend that because we didn't think it was necessary. But if the commission thinks it's necessary, in other words, we have a program that we don't think is broken and actually getting a little better. And there are some folks that struggle to meet that minimum. Other folks make it in a month or far less, quite frankly. But we didn't think it was broken, but it's certainly, if the commission wants to weigh in on that, staff would certainly, be willing to work with you on whatever direction you're headed. But right now, we think it's a good program. We think it's working as it is.
I'll leave it to my fellow commissioners. Thank you, Mick.
And I think it should be noted that you did send this out to all the fishermen and the commercial fishermen in the harbor, and that there is no one here tonight speaking about it.
Madam Chair, thank you for reminding me of that. I did. It's difficult to get a lot of the fishermen together at one time to discuss this, which I've done a couple of times. So I decided in lieu of that, what I'd do is send the entire commission package to all the fishermen. And 2 fishermen have approached me. One individual said that this is great. He liked both the amendments because, de facto, they liberalized the policy relative to the administrative aspects. And the other one wanted to make sure he read it correctly, that I don't have to bring my fish tickets to the waterfront anymore. And I said, that's correct. And so he was happy to.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Any other commission staff?
Yes.
Commissioner Powell.
Just one late comment. I'd just like to point out that I learned recently, and maybe the rest of you already knew this, that Mr. Cronman has authored a fine and interesting book on the history of fishing. But I hadn't been aware of that until I saw an announcement about a reading, and I think that that's admirable.
Great. Anything from the staff to us, sir?
Madam Chair, nothing from staff tonight. Thank you.
And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. We are adjourned.
The time of a derby winner.